Hashem, Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf Ayin Vav Avodah Zarah 76. Today's daf yomi is dedicated to a shmir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shriyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the Sarah. Today's daf brings us to the last daf in the Sechas Avodah Zarah, and we're going to start on the bottom of Ayin Hey Amud Beis, bottom of 75b. So the Gemara hold on 1 second. So the Gemara, we're going to start 3 lines after the lines get wide on 75b, and this is the daf that talks about how we kosher utensils, etc., and leads us to an incredible ending of this Masechta. And we say a bracha the same way we're able to finish this Masechta. Maybe, God willing, finish many more Masechtas together and all of Shas many times. So Tana Rabbanan Alokech Kli Tashmish Mena Ovdei Kochavim. If somebody purchases a utensil that's typically used for food from an idolater, and if it's something that the idolater has not used yet, matpilin vein Torah, and just immerse it in the mikvah, and that's sufficient. But if it's something that you use with cold, could go in kosos, pikatonios, tzlochios, like these cups or jugs. You wash them off and then you immerse them, and that's okay. But if it's something that you do use, and something you use with heat, could go in ayoros, vacuum. So like these pots, these large pots, or these small pots, or and these are things that you warm things up in. Magilin, then you pour boiling, or you immerse them in boiling water, and then matpilin, and then you immerse them in the mikvah vein tahorim, and that's okay. Or things that you use via fire, going to shpudin, vaskoos, like spit and grilled. Melamnin umatbilin, you have to burn them up, and you immerse them in the mikvah vein tahorim, and under those circumstances, you're going to be ritually pure. And let's say you use these utensils before you kosher them, so you have a utensil from an idolater. Boker Tov Hobbs were 4 lines from the bottom. Any utensil you get from the idolater and you have not yet koshered it, you haven't immersed it in the mikvah. You have not done hago, which is boiling the water. And you haven't burnt it. So what's the story with respect to such food? So Gemara says, Tani Chada Asar, the Tanya Idach Mutter. One Tana will say that the food is now prohibited. The other Tana will say that the food is going to be permitted. Tanya Idach Mutter. So how do we explain this? Are they contradicting each other? The Gemara says, "Whoa, kasha." So okay, we have a contradiction between the brises, which is not exactly a question. The Gemara wants to try to figure out how the brises are not contradicting each other. And the brisa says, "Hakamandar Amar Nosin Tam of Gam Asar, Hakamandar Amar Nosin Tam of Gam is Mutter." So the Gemara is explaining that the two brisos are arguing over the concept of what we call Nosin Tam of Gam. That if the food is giving off and imparting a bad taste, a taste that you don't want in the food, or that's detrimental to the food, whether or not that's going to make the food that it imparts a taste to prohibited or permitted. So the brisa that says that if you use the utensils of the idolater, presumably you don't want their taste in your food. So therefore, if you're getting the taste in your food, one brisa says no sintam of gam is prohibited, and therefore the food item that you have is going to be prohibited, and the other one says it's permitted, and so therefore, even though you use the pot of the idolater, your food is still kosher. Well, man, the Amar knows in time of Gam is mutter. So the Gemara says, well, according to the one who says that the pots, that if you cook in a pot of an idolater, it's allowed. Well, if that's the case, the Torah tells us we learn in the book of Midbar, we learn about the pots of the Midianites. And we said that you have to kasher them. So it says tavir b'eish v'taher, that you're required to kasher it. Rashi said Debayagoa. So according to you, who says that nosing tam of gam is permitted, that if it gives off a taste you don't want, then it's permitted. Then why does the Torah tell us to kasher the pots of the idolaters? Rav Chia Bered Rav Huna, so Rav Chia Bered Rav Huna tells us, indeed, well, also Torah El Kedera Bat Yoma. Yeah, when the Torah tells us, on the top of 76a, the Torah tells us that you're required to kasher the utensil. When does the Torah is telling us it's prohibited? If it's a Kedera Bat Yoma, if it's used that same day. The first question every rabbi knows to ask when somebody calls up and asks, says they made a mistake using a utensil that was not proper. You ask if that was a Kedera Ben Yoma. So usually we say Kedera Ben Yoma is a utensil used in the last 24 hours, but if you're actually precise on the Rashi here, Rashi says Bas Yoma Shabishal Ba'ol Kochav Mayom. That's a utensil that the dollar cooked with today. Avobishals that etmol, but if you cooked in it yesterday, kvar hifig b'tayim obelina salayla, the taste got ruined overnight. Not necessarily, according to this Rashi, 24 hours, just overnight. V'shuv keshepolto b'tav shel acher inu elov gam. And now when this utensil is giving off flavor into another pot, into another food item, it's ruining it. It's detrimental to it. And so the Torah is only telling you it's prohibited if it's the same day. The Rav nosin tam of gamu, because it's nosin tam of, it's not nosin tam of gam that same day, because you just used that pot and the food hasn't gone bad. But mikan ve'ilch, but from that point on, lishteri. So from that point on, it is permitted. And Rashi says here, af lechatchila. Even so, the Gemara is asking the question. The Gemara says, "Mikam ve'elch history," and the Gemara asks, "Well, from that day on, is it permitted?" So, if that's the case, you mean to tell me that if it's not a derabas yoma, it's actually permitted after that? So the Gemara says, "No, lichatchila, it's not going to be permitted. Make a decree, gezerah kedera she'ena bas yoma, mishum kedera bas yoma." That technically speaking, it should be permitted, but the rabbis don't allow it the next day because of a decree that you might come to use utensil even the same day, but it doesn't make the food not kosher, and that's the way we paskin, that if it's the same day, it's going to make the food not kosher. But if it's not the same day, it's nosin tam of gam, and so therefore ideally you can't use it. But if you do, it doesn't make the food non kosher. So if you accidentally used the non kosher pot, but the pot hadn't been used that day, then it will make it. It doesn't make the food non kosher. So the Gemara says v'idach, but according to the one who says that nosin tam of gam is prohibited. So if that's the case, how does he learn out this law from this verse? Because it says, how does he learn out this law from the verse? Because you could say the Torah only prohibits a kedera bas yoma. So if that's the case, how does he know that a kedera that's not even the same day is also prohibited? So he says, kedera bas yoma nami mifgam pagama. He says, no, even the same day, you don't want the food from that pot. Even if it was used the same day, you don't want it being imparted. And so that's basically the dispute, whether or not kedera bas yoma is nosin tam of gam or not, or whether or not we say nosin tam of gam is permitted or prohibited. And we say that nosin tam of gam is permitted, which is a very, very important principle to just establish as a person goes through your day and studies the halachos. So one of the most important principles. So Ramile Rav Amram or Rav Sheshes. So Rav Amram basically raised the question to Rav Sheshes. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, it says Hashpudin Vaskoa, the spits and the grills, Milabnin Ba'or. So he says that you have to basically, if you buy spits and grills from an idolater, you have to burn them in fire, and that's how you kasher them. But we have a problem, but we learned in the Mishnah with respect to Kodshim, it says in God Baruch Hashem, we're going to come up to this Masechta in around we're going to come up to this Mishnah in around 2 months. It says Hashpur v'skoa magilin v'cham. It doesn't say you burn them in a fire. That you doesn't say that the way you kasher them is by burning them out, but by magilin. Hagoa is by immersing something in boiling water. So you immerse them in boiling water, magilin v'chamin. And then it's okay. So let's go back 1 second. So there's 2 different stages, and Rashi is very clear about this. There's libon, which is burning something, and then there's hagoa, which is boiling in a water. And boiling in a water is not as strong a method of kashering as burning, because boiling in water does not burn the utensil. But libon, Rashi reminds us, is burning the utensil. So if that's the case, how come it says that hashpud Vaskala, you have to burn them in fire in our Mishnah when it comes to the idolaters, but when it comes to the sacrificial food, it says you immerse it in boiling water. So this is the question that Rav Amram raised to Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes responds in a beautiful manner. He says, Amram Bari. He says to him, Amram, my son. He wasn't his son, he was a student, but he called his student his son. They're 2 separate things. Ovdei Kochavim, Gilui Ovdei Kochavim is non-kosher food, whereas Kachim is sacrificial food. Sacrificial food can become prohibited, but immediately it's not prohibited. It only becomes prohibited when it becomes nosar, when it's expired meat. But before it's expired, it's in a state of permitted. And so therefore, why would you compare Kodshim to the pots of the idolaters? By Kodshim, it didn't absorb anything that's prohibited. It absorbed something that's permitted. And so therefore, it's sufficient to just immerse it in boiling water. But by the pots of the idolaters, they absorbed something which was not kosher. And so therefore, you have to burn it out. That's the distinction, whether it was Haderabala or Isurabala. And that's also another very important principle with respect to kashrus, and it's going to be something very relevant when you're dealing with questions of, let's say, kashering something for Pesach, where it's only absorbed something that's permitted and not something that's prohibited. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, or Rava, depending on the Girsa, Sov ki kapolet isur kapolet. Well, 1 second. In the end, okay, when it absorbed the kachim, it wasn't permitted. But now that it's been expired and you're trying to kasher it became nosar, become expired sacrificial food, which is prohibited. So sov ki kapolet, when it's throwing out the flavor, isur kapolet, it's throwing out the non-kosher flavor. So therefore, El Amar Rava, Maya Goa, what does it mean when it says also by Kachim, Hagoa is not sufficient, but rather the Hagoa that's referred to in Kachim, it doesn't mean that you need to do just immerse in boiling water, but rather it means actually that burning is insufficient by Kachim, but rather Nami Shtifa Umarika. You need to do rinsing and scouring, and you need to do more items. There's a dispute in the Gemara in Zvachim. What is this rinsing and scouring? is that if it's in cold water and then the shtifa is outside and the marika is inside, or rather, what it means is that the marika is with hot water and shtifa is with cold water. And so therefore, that's a dispute. But that we're seeing from here that it's insufficient to do the libun. So Amarle Abaye, so Abaye says to Rava, mi dami. Can you really say that the Tana is referring to? He's calling Hagoa, Marika, and Shtifa. Marika is Shtifa bitzonin. Hagoa b'chamin. Marika and Shtifa is with cold, and Hagoa is with hot. So because the word Hagoa implies hot water, and so therefore you can't say that that's what it refers to. El Amar Abaye Yagid Ra'o. Each Mishnah is teaching us about the other Mishnah. And the Mishnah in Kachim is teaching us about our Mishnah, and our Mishnah is teaching us about the Mishnah in Kachim. This is an expression we've had several times in Ezekiel Yagido Avreo, which is from a pasuk in Eov. Tana Acha Libun V'hu Adin La'Gola. The Tana on our Mishnah mentions that in order to kasher something that was used on the fire by idolaters, you need to burn it, but you also need Hagoah. You need to do immersion in the hot water as well. And there the Tana mentions you need boiling water, but you also need burning. So Amalei Rava, that doesn't make any. Rava says, I don't understand what you're saying. Listen to Kul B'chada. You should have just mentioned you need libun and Hagoah by one Mishnah. And the second Mishnah should just teach one of those laws, either libun or Hagoah. V'lema Yagido Avreo. Yagido Avreo is when each Mishnah, well, one of the Mishnah says the entire thing, but in this case, they're contradictory. They're not saying the same thing. So El Amar Rava, so therefore Rava says, Kachim Hainu Tamayo. Rava says, what's the reason why Kachim requires boiling water? Because you have Nachman Amar Rav Bar Avua. The Amar Kol Yom Vayom. Every day that you cook in that utensil, that pot is doing Hagoah for the previous day. Basically, every day you boil the pot, and so therefore the kachim is boiled out and kashered. And so therefore, before the absorbed flavors become nosar, they're already removed through the boiling. And so therefore, the utensils of the pot do not have any prohibited absorptions. So the Gemara says, Teinach Shlamim. Well, you had a question? The boiling is, but it's not yet prohibited. You're boiling it before it's prohibited. So we'll get to what they say, and then we'll come back and answer your question. They're going to go through our discussion. The Gemara says, Teinach Shlamim, that makes sense about the Shlamim. Shlamim, you typically have 2 days to eat it. The Kivin do Shnei Yamim Mesachli, it's 2 days before it becomes prohibited. Mikmei din Ave Noser Ko Ave Gil, that before it becomes expired, you're boiling it out the next day. But the sin offering, Kivin do Yom V'Layla Mesacho, a sin offering, you only have 1 day and 1 night to eat it, and the next day it becomes prohibited. When you cook the chatas offering, the sin offering at 1 day, the next day in the morning, have a nosar. It's already expired and prohibited. The chatas, if you cook it at 1 day, the next day it's already prohibited. So it's going to be a big problem. You don't have the 2 days. So the Gemara answers, Amri, well, it's tzricha. No, the Gemara says how do we explain Rava's answer? The reason why the kachim does not require libun is because that said, the chimivasha b'chatas ha'inna, hadar mivasha ba'inna sham. No, the chatas is not the last thing. The Gemara is talking about a case where the chatas is not the last thing cooked that day. And after you cook the chatas, you then cook the shamim in that pot. And so therefore, it's immediately kashered. So the chatas to machar shalom de'esmal ba'adei adadi kashalom zitmanayu. That the chatas to the next day and the shlomim from today that they finish off at the exact same time. And then you cook the shlomim. So in that circumstance, Hagoah is sufficient. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, that you're saying it's automatically kosher because of the manner in which you cooked in the base of Mikdash, then why do you need a kosher at all? You should never need a kosher anything. The Gemara says, kosher. Indeed, that's difficult. So Rav Papa says, well, no, the difference between the way you kosher with kosher, that you need to boil it, and the way you kosher it with a non-kosher idolater's food is that you need to burn it, is high kared, high low kared. That one of them hardens and the other one doesn't harden. Meaning, Rav Papa saying that by kachim, it is turning out something that's prohibited. But since every day you're using it, there's not a downtime in between, and so therefore the absorbed flavor in it did not get hardened, and so therefore you're able to remove it through the hagoah, through the boiling. But by the utensil of a goy, since you're not always cooking in it, therefore the blia gets hardened in it, and it requires libud. That's Rav Papa's answer. Rav Ashi gives a different answer. Olam Kedamar Meikari goes back to the distinction between kachim and something that was absorbed by idolater's food. That by kachim you can do agoa because it absorbed permitted food, but by idolaters cooking you need to burn it because it absorbed prohibited food. But what about the fact that now it's giving out a non-kosher flavor because it's expired? So the answer is be'inna de kapoet lo iso isur be'inei. Still, we don't care because when it is giving out the non-kosher flavor, the prohibition is not be'in anymore. It's not there anymore in existence, and so therefore, in fact, it was never in existence, the prohibition, because it was already absorbed, and it's just a flavor, and so therefore it's not as strict, and so therefore Hagoah works. But in our Mishnah, the prohibition was once be'in, it was once in existence, and that's a distinction. You have a question, Jeff? You're asking? No, that. Is the oil flavor, or is the without water and discard? Well, when it's not, does that water become non-kosher? Well, it depends at what point you're boiling it. If you're boiling it after 24 hours, then it's nosin tam of gam, and we just said that it's not non-kosher. But if it's within 24 hours, then you would throw it out. But the point is that since it's boiling, it makes it non-kosher. It makes it kosher at that time. It koshers it out. So that's the process. But you're not allowed to use the water from that pot. You can't drink that water that you koshered it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Hops. So that's an excellent question. So I haven't gone through all the Rishonim on the sugya to see how they are explaining that, but I can just tell you, practically speaking, that we are careful when we kosher pots, that you're supposed to do two things to make sure, ideally. One is you don't kosher a pot if it's a ben yomo. You don't kosher the pot if it's been used in the last 24 hours. And also, when you kosher a pot, you're supposed to make sure you have shishim. You have 60 times. So you have to use a big pot, so it's 60 times any flavor that's in it. So therefore, we're careful to kosher it in that way. So v'ad kama mo'abnan, how long do you have to burn it for? The prohibited flavor that's absorbed into the pot. So you have to have 60 times the prohibited flavor, the volume of the pot. 60 times the volume of the surface. Yeah. Right? Kama Malabna, and how long do you have to wait before you burn it? Money agitasher klipasan. That when you burn it, you have to be able to remove the outer layer. I mean to say until the klipa of metal, the outer shell becomes burnt off. The Kate said Magilin, and how long do you have to boil it? Amrafuna Yora Katana Batoch Yora Gazol. And this is what I was just talking about. That you stick a small pot into a hot pot. And then Toso says our custom is immediately afterwards, you wash it off with cold water. Toso says he doesn't understand the purpose of this custom, but that is the custom. So Yora Gedolamai, how do you kasher a large pot? How do you kasher a large pot? Tashma da hu duda da have be Ravakavya. That Ravakavya had a pot. Ahaderle gadanfa, and what he did was he took a gadanfa delisha puma. He surrounded the lip of it with with some dough around the lip of the utensil. Umalyua maya v'irtacha, and he filled the utensil with water and he boiled it up. And then the whatever reached the lip of the utensil was able to go to the top because he basically made a rim around the top. They didn't have covers for their pots. So, or even if he did, because if you would cover it, then the like spray wouldn't get to those utensils. So therefore, he basically made the top hotter. As a practical method, what we do today is we lower something that's boiling hot, like a hot tea kettle that's boiling into the pot, so the boiling water rolls over the side. So Amarava man chacham umeber ki milsa ilav vakavya de Rabba. He says, Rabba said, who's going to be so smart to come up with such a principle except for Rabba Kavya, who's such a great man? Kasavar, because he's in the position, and this is the fundamental idea. Kebolo kachpol, so that the way you absorb it is the way you give it out. That's the fundamental principle of kashering utensils. And ma bolo benitzotos, and just like when it absorbed, it wasn't cooking directly there. It was just like sparks, not really sparks, but like sprays of the water reach there of the flavor of poto benitzotos. So it's enough to assume that just like it absorbed in that manner, it wasn't direct, it was indirect. So too, that's how it was giving off the flavor. Hasakin shafavitahora, a knife that you have to shave it down. You have to rub it down, and then it is tahora. Amarav ukfa barchama. No, it's a sarah pamim bakarka. Now you have to that after you sanded down the knife with a stone, you need to dip it 10 times in the ground to get off any fat that's on the knife. So Amar Avuna Breder of Yeshua, yeah, you have to do this. Ubekar Kasheina Avuda in earth it's not plowed. That will be what gets rid of the fat. And Amar Kahuna, and this only works besaf sakin yafash in bagumos if it's a very smooth knife that there's no indentations in it. But if there are indentations, then the itza bekarka, then it's sticking it in the earth will not work because we have to be concerned that the shamnunis, the fat, got stuck in a crevice, and therefore that won't be an effective method. If it's a nice knife, you could stick it in the ground, but if it's not a nice knife, then that doesn't work. And this is something very important because a lot of people have this thing that if their knife becomes not kosher, they just have to stick it in the earth. But says Rav Huna Berei Rav Yeshua, that only works like hobo sonin. That only works to use it for something that's cold, because if it has the fat on it, then it's like you're washing it with soap. But so therefore, it doesn't get off if the knife was used for heat and there's prohibited flavor in it, then sticking it in the ground is not going to get rid of it. It only gets rid of it to clean it, but not to kasher it. And so therefore, it's only okay. And therefore, it's only okay to stick it in the ground if you want to use it for cold. But if you want to use it for heat, you need to do hagala, or some say libun, depending upon the dispute. But certainly, if to use that knife with something hot, sticking it in the ground will be insufficient. And now the Gemara ends with this story. Yehuda bati batuve avoyas vikame the shvor malka. Bati Bar Tuva and Mar Yehuda were sitting in front of Shvor Malka. Shvor Malka was this Persian king. We had him a couple of times. And Aisul Kamayu Esro, by the way, it's not the only Masechta that he ends with. And he ends off another Masechta, but anyway, I think he ends off Baba Basra. I forget which one it was. We can look it up. Aisul Kamayu Esrog, maybe it was Baba Mitzia. Aisul Kamayu Esrog, they brought in front of him an Esrog, Pasak, Achal. So Shmuel Malka cut up the Esrog and he ate it. Then Pasak, Vahavile, Bati Bartuva, then he cut off a little piece of it and gave it to Bati Bartuvati. Hadar Data Asar Zimni Ba'ara. Then he stuck the knife 10 times in the ground. He kashered it, so to speak, and Pasuk Havlela Mar Yehuda, and he gave it to Mar Yehuda. Amroi Bati Bartuve, Mahu Gavra Lav Bar Yisrael. He said, "What about me? I'm also Jewish. I'm also Jewish." So he said, "No, I'm only Mar Kimwe Begavei Mar Kimwe Kimwe." He says, Rabbi Yehuda, I recognize. By the way, here Rashi called him not Mar Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda. I recognize him that he's very careful and he's not going to eat anything prohibited. But you, I don't know that you're so careful, so I didn't do it for you. Then the Gemara gives us a different version of this story. That alternatively, he said to him, Idkar my avadata ba'orta. He said, well, 1 second, but the Bartuva, just before you start talking to me about how kosher you are, you should remember what you did last night. She says that the Persians had the practice that they sent women over to their guests, and therefore, when Shvur Malka sent these women to the two guests, the Bati Bartuva and Rav Yehuda, Bati Bartuva decided to welcome the women into his room, but Rav Yehuda didn't accept it. So he said, "Well, I assume therefore you would not mind eating this from my knife." But the Tosfos points out, Tosfos says, what kind of women did he send? He sent 2 Canaanite slaves. And Tosfos says, because Bati didn't do a sin with this. Why? Because he was also a slave. Because he required a get shichur. And so therefore, he didn't get the document of emancipation. And so therefore, Bati Bartuva was allowed to be with a fellow slave. And that's why he didn't do it. So Tosfos was trying to help him. But clearly, to my mind, the Gemara is ending the Masechta on a powerful idea, which is, okay, remember what you did last night. Meaning to say that we have a responsibility to always remember what we did last night when it comes to our service of Hashem. Can't just be, be pious and, like say, oh, I need to make extra stringency with respect to a knife on a cold food, but also remember what we did last night when it comes to our service of Hashem. Chas v'shalom, we shouldn't do anything. But if we're going to publicly talk about how pious we are, remember what we did last night. Baruch Hashem, we're going to make a siyum on Masechtas Avodah Zarah, God willing, this Shabbos, and the same way we finish this Masechta, we finished many, many more Masechtas together, that we should finish the Shas many times together, and a big shkoyach to everybody. Thank you for studying with me.